Hey there everyone, Hitesh here and welcome to the late night show. This is almost 1 o'clock in the night. I just got up and I thought before starting working on something, let's record a video. And what's a better way to start a video or put up a crash course on Socket.io? It has been in the demand for a while and finally I got some time, of course in the late night, but let's get started with a Socket.io. Now, before recording this crash course, I have done a little bit of the work so that I can actually focus on the Socket.io. So I've stripped out a lot of functionality which is not related to Socket.io, yet we are able to build something so that we can understand where the Socket.io is and most importantly, what Socket.io is not. We will be using some of the dependencies like Express and Nano ID, but these are just to make sure they are bare minimum there to perform the bare minimum chat application, but it is not going to hinder our experience to learn the Socket.io. I dedicatedly wanted to focus more on Socket.io and hence we are going to be doing that. I will be walking you through with reading some of the documentation. I know some of you don't like that, but this is the most important aspect of being a developer. So don't worry, I will walk you through along with me and we're going to create a backend for this chat app as well as a front end in the React or in the chat app. So don't worry, nothing super fancy, just the basics to understand the Socket.io as well. Let's go ahead and get started with that. I have got some of the documentation for you. So let's go up here. And also there's going to be a link which is going to be useful for you. So let me just open that up. Let me search that quickly. And that is going to be for course. So go ahead, search it up on the blog section of Learn Code Online. And this is going to be helpful for us later on. So I'll come back onto this one. So the first thing that we're going to require in order to work with this application is the Express. We won't be creating any route like slash or slash chat. Surely we can do that, but I don't want to hinder the experience of learning Socket.io. So we'll be having it, but we won't be using it too much. Apart from that, of course, we will be using Socket.io. So that's what we'll be studying and we'll be using that. And apart from this, we'll be using a Nano ID. Nano ID is like almost UUID, but this is just to give our every user who is connecting to this socket a unique name. Nothing more than that. You can definitely skip this one, but I thought it's a fun library to explore and I'll show you some of the aspect of it as well. And later on, we'll be working on a little bit on the course, which is always a nightmare for almost all developers to handle around. So we'll face that as well. Okay. So let me go ahead and open a new VS Code extension here and we will be creating a new folder. Let me go ahead and call this one as LCO socket. I know you cannot see that, it's on my other screen. Let's go ahead and drag and drop this LCO socket. That's all what we need. And yes, I trust this entirely. Let's go ahead and expand this and we'll be working on this. Okay, looks nice and easy. First, let's create a couple of folders here. Let's call this one as backend. And let's create another one which is front end, and seems like I have entered this folder on the wrong place. No worries, we can fix that up here. Let's bring up the terminal, so because everything looks good in terminal. Let's go ahead and do a ls. We have backend, so let's move into backend, or let's first move the folder around. Okay, let's hit Control L and we're going to say that I want to go ahead into the backend. Let's move into backend first, cd backend, and now I want to move this front end folder to one directory back, and that should be, yeah, this is what we want. Moving up, first let's handle the backend part. So we're going to simply say npm init to initialize a repository. I'll just say -y to just get everything as a default option, and let's go ahead and open up this package.json. There is nothing too much fancy going on in here. We have this index.js and we have backend and everything is nice and easy. Let's go ahead and install a few repositories that we are going to need. So we're going to say npm install. Of course, we are going to need Express. We are going to need socket.io. We are going to need Nano ID. And just for fun, we're going to use NodeMon as well. Now, it's not really compulsory, or you can also use NodeMon as a dev dependency. I'm trying to make things much more easier, so I'll be just installing it. Let's go ahead and wait for the installation. Okay, that was ridiculously fast, but we have got all the packages up here. Again, let me remind you, you can definitely put the NodeMon as a dev dependencies, not as a main dependency, but I'm going to be pushing it up on GitHub so everybody can follow along. So I'll make things easier a little bit. And also, I'm going to go ahead and change this to server.js, nothing very much specific, but we got to do this. Let's change the script to start, and we are going to go ahead and say hey nodemon, just take over to this server.js. That's all the things we need to change in the package.json. Save that and we can close this. And now further down in the backend, we are going to create a new file. Let's call this one as server.js. Now surely I can start writing the code just right here, but that's not a good way of handling the things. So let's go ahead and explore a little bit of the documentation. So coming up here, express, it's a pretty simple one. We can go ahead and say const express require express, and we can create an app from that. We will be doing that in a minute. That's the basic role, and that's the only part of express we'll be using up. Most importantly, we are not going to create a server from the express. So we are not going to say app.listen. This is the most important and crucial part of it. The server that you create with the express and the listener that you create with the socket.io are a little bit different. So we won't be using this one. We'll be using the one with the socket.io. The most important thing, let's go up into the introduction. And by the way, I love the diagrams that are there in the socket.io. I think they are somehow unique, and the font style, loving it. The most important thing I want to bring your attention here is the first line, that socket.io is a library that enables real-time, bidirectional, and event-based communication. This is going to be the entire part of our crash course, that it is event-based. So you do the regular stuff with the event. You do connection with the event, you go disconnect with the event, you emit these events, you broadcast these events. So all the things related to the event, and you carry forward them into your client as well. An event which is expected to be listen up in the server, your client also need to broadcast or emit that event so that they can talk on to the same guys. Okay. Apart from that, one important line is here, which is most important. In case you are going to understand it, that's fine. Otherwise, you can leave that. So what socket.io is not? Remember, socket.io is not a WebSocket implementation. It also covers additional metadata to each packet. We'll see that packet or a payload in a minute. And that is why a WebSocket client will not be able to successfully connect with a socket.io server. So all those guys who actually work already into the WebSocket, this is not a WebSocket implementation. So keep that in mind in case you are looking forward to go more in depth of this socket.io. That's basics of it. Okay. Let's go up first into installation. We have already done the npm install socket.io, so that is all done. Moving up into the initialization part. This is how the initialization works. We'll be working with the ES modules here. So we need to first import the create server from HTTP. We also need to import server from the socket.io, and then we can go ahead and initialize an instance of that. So we will be actually kind of a shortifying or compressing them together. You can use the exact same copy paste syntax here as well, no big issue. And then we see that inside this, when we create an IO from this server, it is based on the HTTP server, but there are some options given to us. We'll explore these options when we'll move into some of the troubles that we'll get through in this course. So that is going to be the important part. Let's go ahead and figure it out this much, and then we'll see the rest of the stuff. So let's go up here into the server. So let's go up there. So first we're going to go ahead and say I need an app, which is going to be coming up from require, and we will be saying I need express for that. We are going to initialize it on the go. You can go ahead and do this in the separate line, but I think this is a shorthand notation, pretty fine. Okay, let's go ahead and create a server, and this server will be coming up from require. Let's go ahead and go for HTTP, and we are going to go ahead and say create server, and this server will be based on app. So what we have done just right now. Okay, I know this is a little bit too much, so let me try to explain this a little bit more. So the first thing that we have done is this line. So we have said that first we can bring express and can say require express, and based on the express we can initialize a variable app. So instead of doing this in 2 lines, I have done it in just 1 line. I have created an app based on the express, and I have initialized it on the go. You'll see this kind of coding style as well, so I thought let's give it that as well. But again, in case you're not comfortable, you can go ahead and copy paste literally these 2 lines instead of that 1 line. Moving further, when the server initialization is happening, again, same thing, we are going to require a method, create server from HTTP. So that method is coming up directly from here. I haven't actually got it yet. So this create server, this is exactly that same method, create server. And apart from that, we need a server from socket.io. So I have just gone ahead and will be using that in a second. But right now, this is the first line. Okay. Moving on, let's go ahead and create a connection. So we're going to say same thing. So IO is going to be connected based on require, and we're going to require socket.io, and let's go ahead and use directly as server. There we go. So this is exactly same as I told you. We are using a server from socket IO, and then here in the IO we are creating a server. So this is just exactly same. I prefer this as more cleaner approach of working with the things, but let me also walk you through. There is one more thing. Notice here there are some options given to you. If you can see that, these options are always going to be handy for you. So as soon as you create a new IO from this server using the HTTP server of the basic node modules, these are most essential and we are going to explore them. Without this, it is almost impossible to create a production grade server. So you should really know about these options. What to go or what to put inside these options, that's going to come up a little bit later. Okay, let's move on. Then you can actually create these connections, or you can create these events, and there are many of these events. The one we are working on or we are looking forward is the connection. And then based on this HTTP server, or maybe you have called it something else, we need to listen on this port. So let's go ahead and finish up this part of the implementation now. Okay, I'll be removing these options because I'll come back later on and we'll finish this part. Okay, so that is all good. Now let's go ahead and say IO.on, and yes, by the way, there are many other options. As you can see, create server, require, there's a lot going on. We'll be working with on, and we'll be saying that I need a connection. Make sure your spelling is correct here. I have done a couple of mistakes before this one. And here you get your arrow functiony thing or callback, whatever you like to call that. No big offense there. And it actually gives you a socket back, which is actually a connection. Now this socket includes a lot of information, and we can go ahead and put up a log here to explore it further. Let's go ahead and say what is socket. I know there are better ways of handling the situation, but I think we'll be going with this way. So there we go. Now we can actually print this on the log, and whenever somebody makes a connection on this, we can explore what this socket is more. Apart from this, we will be saying that socket needs to be active, so we need some log information here. So we'll be saying a socket is active to be connected. There we go. Couple of nice log information. Now comes up is the most important part. You have just kind of enabled the connection, but this is not enough. You need to make sure that you are listening to certain events so that you can pass on certain information with that. So let me walk you through with that. So we have this socket. Remember, this socket is coming up here after the connection is being made. And on this socket, you can actually listen to a variety of these events. And the good part is that you can call this event to anything what you like. I'm going to call this one as chat, but feel free to call it as Superman, Batman, whatever you like. The whole idea is, understand this, that some of these strings are by default, like connection, disconnect. These are given to you by socket IO. But it also gives you some of the ability to connect on these events that you are naming it, so that you can be consistent throughout the server and the front end. Okay. So that is basic. Now, of course, just the event is not good enough. Event will also carry some of the information like some text, maybe some images, maybe some JSON data, whatever is being passed on. This is usually called as payload, but it's not really compulsory to call it as payload. This is just a packet of information that is coming up. So that's what it is. Usually payload is a good term for using that. Again, this is your arrow thingy, which is also a callback. So we got a payload up here. Okay, also it is important to know and figure out what is payload. So we're going to do exactly same. What is payload? And we will be going for payload. There we go. Nice and easy. But this is not enough. Now we are listening to this event, but we also need to respond to this event. The way how we respond to this event, we go ahead and again use this IO. Always, no matter what kind of event you are going to create, the syntax is always going to remain same. We need to emit, and we need to emit on the same chat event because this is what we are looking for. And whatever the payload user is sending, I'm going to just throw that back. So this is the whole idea of the chat, that we receive all these information and we throw that information back so that it's kind of a broadcast level of chat. Again, you don't need to broadcast. You can add more additional logic here. Let me walk you through with that as well. What we are doing is kind of an open room of a chat that we are building up. That's why we are throwing the entire thing back as a payload. You can extract some information from that payload and can selectively send that information too. Okay, moving on a little bit, what I would like to bring your attention here are some of the events into emitting the events. So notice here some of the events like connection and some more here. which I hope I can find. But there are a lot more events like disconnect and all of that while reading the documentation and found out. But notice here, we can actually emit the events like hello, and on the client side, we can look for these events as well. So this hello is a representation that you can name your event anything that you like. Now a little bit more on to that. You can also, we will be using this listening to the events, and there is a emit cheat sheet as well. So notice here there is a room one and a whole bunch of things going on. I think that is too much. But what I would like to bring your attention is a little bit of the adapter. Let me search for that. Adapters, because this is most important thing you should be knowing for that. Let's go look for MongoDB adapter, but there can be Redis adapters or anything. I think the diagram is going to do more justice than explaining. So this is what it is. So let's just say you want to save this chat into a MongoDB or any other database. Notice here we have successfully able to create a server, and you can put multiple server instances for these things. Then you can also engage a MongoDB adapter or any other database adapter, which will pull the information from these socket and will save that into the database. And the same thing can happen up here in the server B as well. So eventually what's happening is you are storing and you are retrieving everything from the adapter. I think that's going to go too much in depth for this crash course. But again, depends enough of your comment comes in, we can actually do adapter here as well. It's not that much of a crazy thing to go on. Okay, moving on. Now let's move on to the part where things are mistakenly being done by initial developers, and I have done that as well. Since you have created an app using Express, it is kind of a habit that we go ahead and say app.listen, and we go ahead and say I'm listening on 3000 or maybe some another port. Let's go for 5000. And then you receive a callback just like this, and you go ahead and say that I'm going to do a console log, and I'll say server is active ... which is very important. So let's go ahead and work on with that. Now let's go ahead and say npm start on this one. And what you're going to see that server is active. Now this is deceiving. This is very, very deceiving. You have done everything so good, but you have actually initialized the server using the Express, which is not the case. This is not going to work. So make sure you don't do this. I'm going to go ahead and comment this. So just to make sure that you remember that this is not how we create a listening server on this. We go ahead and use this server. Remember, this server is actually coming up from the create server, and everything is being injected in the IO. That is the most important thing. You need to listen onto some another port so that your chat can happen, not on the main server. So we're going to go ahead and say listen on this server instead of this app, and we're going to go same thing. We're going to go 5000, and let's go ahead and do the callback thingy and call it as log, and let's call this as a server is listening at port 5000, and of course 3 dots are very important. So there we go. That's all you need to make sure your chat application is working on the back end. Yeah, literally nothing more is required. Remember, let me give you a summarize. These all are just required statement and initialization of the application. The meat part is just from the line number 7 to line number 15. We are making a connection ready so that somebody can connect on this server and on this connection. Once the connection is happened, we are creating a separate event for ourselves, which we are naming as a chat. And on this chat event, we are emitting that whoever listens to this, we will respond you back with the chat event, and we'll throw you off all the payload that you have sent to me. I'll give you that back. So that's kind of a broadcasting thing. That's it. That's all you need. And we can even close this one up here. Okay, so that's the backend part. We have all done with that. And I'm going to open up a new terminal. Okay, let's go up here and let's go into the front end part. And we need to create a React app. Now, it's not really compulsory that you create a React app. You can create anything. I'm going to just go ahead work with the npx React app. So we'll be doing create React app. And we will be calling this one as Chatty. That's a fine name. Let me go ahead and quickly hit enter and let this be complete. Okay, so seems like our React app is done, and just now I realized that actually we will be using the nano ID in the React itself. I have accidentally installed that in the backend, so we can remove that later on, no big issue. There we go. Okay, let's go ahead and move quickly do a ls, and let's move into Chatty, and everything seems okay-ish. Let's go ahead and see that how the things are going to work into the client side. Let's first figure out the installation. So we need to have some kind of installation going up here. And notice here it says installation, you can do a standalone, but I'm looking for is an npm base. So this is what we have. npm install socketio-client. So this is a client, we'll be going for that. Let's go ahead and paste that, and we will be needing a nano ID as well. So let's go ahead and say nano ID. My bad, I installed this on the back end, but we'll be using it in the majorly front end. So let's go ahead and hit enter. This should be a comparatively smaller one, so seems okay. Let's quickly go ahead and start that. Let's go ahead and say npm. Let me just quickly see that how this is working in the package.json. We can shrink this up a little bit, and we have npm start. That's nice. And we have socketio as well as nano ID being injected. Nice. npm start. There we go. And this should be running on the port 3000. So let's go up with that. Should be taking a little bit while. There we go. Nice and easy. Now let's go ahead and remove some of the stuff from here. Not all, because we'll be using and taking advantage of the CSS of the app itself. We won't be removing header, but we'll be removing everything inside the header. Let's go ahead and remove that. And let's go ahead and use an h1, call this one as chatty app. There we go. Okay, nice dark theme that we got right out of the box. We'll be using some of the CSS. We'll be modifying a little bit of the CSS directly up here. But first, let's remove the logo because we are not using it, so that is fine. Let's import some of the stuff that we'll be using. So we'll be using some stuff from the React itself. So there we go, React. What we'll be using is, we of course need to manage some of the state. So use state. We'll be injecting a hook as well. So we'll be using use effect. The hook for updating our UI for the new chat, and the state to manage all the chat state of the input field that we'll be having. So of course, no big deal. We'll be just having an input field, where we can write the message, and the send button. That's pretty much it. No big deal. Okay, let's go ahead and start with the basics. So first, let's move on to the socketio and see that how the initialization works on. So this is server initialization. We are going for the chat initialization. So here it says you just need to import that, and there are a lot of ways you can do custom names and different domains. So you can use this syntax here, const socketio, and directly connect with this. But there is another option. You can use io.connect here as well. So both options are totally fine, I guess. Let's go ahead and try to connect with that. First, let's import all the stuff. So we're going to say give me an io, which will be coming up from socketio client. Let's also import the nano ID. So nano ID, which will be coming up from nano ID. I'll walk you through with the nano ID documentation in a minute, but right now this is all good. And also we'll be using no.env. So usually these URLs and stuff go into the .env file. We don't have that. We'll be going directly for that. Let's go ahead and create a socket, and we'll be doing the same. We can go ahead and say socket just like this, and can say here http://localhost, and this one is running on port 5000. So this is definitely doable, totally okay, as we just saw in the documentation that this is exactly the syntax we go for. But you're also going to notice that in some of the docs that I did read, they mentioned that this is a better approach. I haven't yet verified that which one is the better approach. The documentation says directly go for IO, but I'll show you that it doesn't really make any difference at all. So we'll be going for that. Nano ID, we won't be using it as of now. We'll go for it later on. Okay, let's move into the app itself. So inside the app, we need to manage the state of a message itself. So let's go ahead and say use state. And the first thing is going to be the message itself that we'll be sending. The initial state of this message is going to be empty. Now, not only that, this is the state of the message that we are sending to the socket, and that will be responding back that whatever we are saying. We also need to maintain a state of all the array that we'll be throwing back, because the chat is going to be a long list of array, and we need to just pull through values from it. So let's go ahead and use that. So we'll be saying use state, and here we'll be saying the entire chat, and it's going to be initially an empty array, but as we get more value, we'll be pushing the values into this array and thus making it a larger array so that we can work on with. Okay. This is all nice and easy so far. Let's go ahead and work on with this chatty app component. So we'll need a form in this one. So let's go ahead and grab a form. There we go. This is the form. And inside the form, we'll be having an input, which is going to be of type text. So basic stuff. The name, let's call this one as simply chat. We don't need an ID, so let's go ahead and remove that. Now we need a couple of values up here. So first, placeholder. So we're going to say the placeholder is going to say send text, something like this. We also need to have a value. Now this value need to be binded with something. So this will be binded with the chat, the state that we are managing, so message. So anything that goes up here will be getting up here as well. And apart from that, we also need to have an on change event. So this on change event will be really simple. We'll be getting that give me an event, and as soon as you give me an event, a method will be fired up, which I haven't yet defined. Let's call this one as set message and e.target.value. This shouldn't really surprise you. This is the regular stuff we do. So any change that is happening is using a method which is set message. So set message is responsible for changing the message, and the actual value is the message. Remember, set message is a method given to you directly by the use state, and the message is actually just an ordinary variable or a constant. Okay, so this part is all done. That's great, but we also need this form to go somewhere, and it cannot go before a button. So we need to inject a button here. Let's go ahead and say I need a button just like that, which is going to just say send. And this button will be of type submit. Okay, so this should look decent as of now. Let's go ahead and see that how is it looking like. It's really small. So what we're going to do is take advantage of the CSS directly given to us by the React itself and make it a little bit bigger. We'll go into index.css and let's write a little bit of the CSS. We'll be saying input, and let's make you bigger. So font size, not like that. Font size is going to be larger. I don't use such values directly, but in this case, it's fine. Let's go ahead and use something for button as well. And for this button, let's also go for font size. And let's call it as larger. As soon as we do this minimum stuff, this is now bearable compared to the previous one. So this is okay. Let's give this button a little bit margin as well on the left side. So margin on the left, let's go for 15 pixels. And that should be fine. Okay, doable. We can do, and we can still work on this one. Okay, now moving on to the stuff, let's go ahead and utilize the basic mean part of it, which is creating an event and sending all of that. So let's go ahead and work on with that. Moving into app.js, we can close this one. We don't need you. Let's go up here just below where we have defined the state. Let's create a method which will be responsible for sending the text. Let's call this one as send chat. There we go. This will be able to receive an event, and based on this, we'll be doing this stuff. The first thing is prevent default. There we go. So that form doesn't automatically sends to any places. We are going to hold this one up here. Okay. This is all good and fine as of now, but one thing that we need to do now is make sure as soon as we receive any chat values, we need to emit an event. What should be the name of that event? We need to call it specifically chat, because that's what exactly we have done in the backend as well. So how we're going to do that? It's pretty simple. We have got this socket which we have enabled, and we just say emit. Told you, it's really the same syntax we always go through with that. So as soon as you go with this, you need to call this one as same chat. And now here you can pass on any of the payload that you want. In my case, I'm going to pass on a payload of object of message. So as soon as this message gets updated, it will be passed on up here. But it's not really compulsory to just pass on one thing. You can just pass on key value pairs. This is technically like this, but I'm pretty sure you are aware of this syntax here. But feel free to pass on something like user and call this one as something like Hitesh. You can go ahead and absolutely do this. We will be actually doing this, but later on. So there we go. We have passed on our payload onto the event chat. That is fine. And once this is all done, we need to actually remove all the values from this message inbox as well. So we'll be calling up this set message, and we'll be making sure that we update the value with the empty one here. Okay, that is fine and that is nice. Now let's go ahead and inject this form just right up here. So let's go ahead and say that when this form actually go ahead and say on submit, we're going to go ahead and use this one just like this, not like this, like this, and call the method up here. So the method is send chat. So let's go ahead and say send chat. That's all what we need to do. Now this should be all okay, but it's going to give us a couple of errors and issues. Let's go ahead and see them as well. Okay, we're trying to connect. Where is the connection string? There we go. We are trying to connect, and we need to figure out some ways of understanding these errors as well. Now right now this is all looking good and nice, and we can see that inside our socket. So let me go up here. This is also looking fine and everything, but there are a couple of issues that you will be facing up. Let me open up, right click, inspect, and go into the console, and you can see that the socket we are not able to connect on 5000 because we are having some of the course policy. To understand more about the course and why it is happening, make sure you read about this article at blog.learncodeonline. This is really in-depth guide and understanding a whole lot about how the course actually happens and stuff. In this case, we'll be going for the course situation directly by searching. I told you those parameters will be really handy now. So course handling, notice here that apart from this HTTP server, we get this object up here, which is handling a lot of course situations. So let me go ahead and copy this and inject that and show you more about it. Let's go into the backend and server.js, and we are injecting it up here. So this is the part, remember, if you can figure it out. This is the HTTP server and socket IO. So this IO, we are injecting it up here. So this is exactly the same line up here. We can go ahead and use an object and inject the course up here. So this is how you handle the course, the origin that you want to accept. In this case, it's localhost, so there is no dot something, localhost.com or localhost.in. I cannot actually use that as a localhost. I need to inject a star here. This is not recommended, but this is the only way I can show you the demo here. You can also inject the method if you have some of the allowed headers. Maybe the login information is required, so you can actually inject that. And you can also mention the credentials and stuff. So a whole lot of information is given to you. Right now, we'll be removing all of this. We don't need it, but this is all what we got to do up here. And this is all active and should be all fine. Let's go up here and see that. So we need to clean this up and hit a refresh. And you need to sometime refresh a couple of times so that you remove these errors. So again, the course issues is now handled and we have resolved the issue. Now, can I go ahead and send a hi to this something? Yes, we can. And notice here our state is now getting emptied. So somehow I can see that this method is now working. Where is our method? Not in the server.js, here. So this send message is now working. We are a client and we are emitting this event. So somehow we need to actually expect that this event is broadcasted to ourselves as well. And thus we inject this use effect hook here. So anything that is being changed, we need to respect that and we need to fill this chat array up here. So let's go ahead and do that. This is really the easy stuff. Let's go ahead and work on with that. So use effect. There we go. This is not going to be dependent on any input. So we're going to remove that part. And we basically don't need anything here as well. So one thing we'll be doing is the socket. So we'll be listening on that event. What is the event that you want to listen on? In this case, the chat is the event. The chat event also takes a whole lot of payload. And we are going to work something on this payload. So how we're going to work on this? I'll be calling a method which is setChat, which is an array. So let's go ahead and take that array. Let's use all the previous values. So all the previous values are now being filled up. And we also want to add one more value, which is payload. So what is happening now? As soon as we send some of these events, notice here, we are not listening directly to this message here. This is the most important thing to remember. We are not listening to the message. We are taking these values from the event, which is socket.on, most important thing. And we are listening to the event on the chat, and we are listening to the payload, and we are, you get the idea. This is basic stuff. I've already covered this in my JavaScript series, but you get the idea. Now, the most important thing is we are able to send this stuff and all, and basics is all right. But now we need to loop through this chat array and show all the messages as well. So I'll do that just above the form. Let's go up here. Let's go ahead and say that I want to inject something. I have this chat array. I want to loop through it. Feel free to use any loop value for each or anything. I'll be going for the map because that sounds the easiest one. In here, we are going to receive a payload because every chat is itself a payload. And we also are going to receive an index. The reason why I'm using the index because there is a key that needs to be injected whenever you are looping. There we go, nice and easy. Now here we are going to go ahead and say that we are going to return, since we have used the curly braces. We can use the parentheses as well, but let's fine. Let's go ahead and work with that. The first thing I'll be doing is I'll be just using a p tag, and inside this p tag I'll be using the payload. Now I told you payload is a big object, so it's not like you can directly say just the payload. It has a lot of properties that need to work on. One of the property that we have injected is the message. Remember how we or when we did that? Remember this is the payload that we have injected. So it's an object which is having this message right now. So we are just destructuring it, kind of destructuring, not exactly, but yeah, this is what we got. Let's go ahead and try to play around with this much. And again, this is going to give me a warning. So before the warning, I'm going to go ahead and say, hey, here is your key. So please don't worry. And index. So now it's not going to complain me much. Let's go ahead and save this. And hopefully things are going to work. Just for safety measures, let's hit a reload and send up a hi. And I can see this hi value and I can say hello. This is not the best of the work, so let's go ahead and add some additional information to give you more idea about this payload, because this can be a little bit confusing. So this is the time where we actually use this nano ID. Okay, how we're going to do that? So this nano ID is really simple. As soon as user connects with this socket, we are going to go ahead and give it a username. You can ask the user to actually enter a username, but we'll be using a nano ID for that. And this is the time where we actually studied the documentation of nano ID. I go up here and I can see this nano ID actually always gives me this big of a value. Now notice giving this much of a big value is not really a great thing for the user. So we can actually read more about the manuals and stuff. And there's a lot more to study in here. And one thing which caught my eye for this particular project is I can create the nano ID based on some of the fields. It's a little bit difficult to find now because I'm recording the video. Yeah, this is, you can actually do custom alphabet, but I saw that we can pass on values here as well. Seed, not seed. Anyways, I'll try to find that and put a screenshot. Sometimes it's difficult to find it again. But what I can do is I can find and inject values like 4 so that it will give me a random values between 1 and 4. So you can go ahead and shortify your username up here. Now, what and how we're going to do that now? You have actually passed on a message, but now you can put up a comma and you can pass on a username as well. Again, it's almost like sending like this, but you know the syntax. So now we have this username as well. Further down the road, I can do that this chat, I told you this is not just a chat, it's the entire payload that we need to loop through the values. So we can go ahead and say that I want to inject this one. So we'll be doing a span up here. So let's go ahead and say put up a colon just like this. We'll be having a span, and inside this we'll be calling it as ID colon, and then let's inject another JavaScript here and payload dot username. There we go, nice and easy. Now we can go up here back onto this, and notice here the IDs are blank because the connection was already established, so it's not gonna inject. Now this is where I'm expecting to see, and I'm still not able to see this ID. Looks like there's something wrong. Yep, my bad, typos, I'm known for that. And there we go, I can see the usernames up here. Okay, now a little bit more to this. Let's make it a little bit beautiful, not too much, but a little bit. Let's go into index.css and let's go ahead and say that if there is a span, we are going to give it first a padding, and the padding is going to be a 5 pixels and 15 pixels to make it look like a little bit buttonish. And we're going to say background color. I usually don't do this, but this time I'm going to go ahead and say orange. Okay, let's see that how this is looking up. So there we go. Now we can see the chat is happening. Now, the most important thing to work on with is we can take this one up here and let's shrink it down, chat app, and open up another incognito tab. There we go. And we can just go ahead and inject that, and I can now connect to this. So there we go. Now our socket is emitting the event, and since we are hooked up to that event, remember in the use effect we are using socket IO events to capture those things. That's why the server is coming into the picture. And we can say this is a chat room, and we are having a nice chat room. Instant everything is going fine, and we are seeing unique IDs as well. And hi there, so everybody's getting a unique ID. This is a fun exercise to work on with that. Now I would like to bring your attention a little bit more on to the documentation part, so we can just actually expand this some more. So what we have studied so far, there are a lot of ways how you can initialize the servers and rooms and a whole bunch of things. Notice here, handling the course, I have already gone through with that, but there are a lot more to study up here, especially the middlewares. This is where the things actually comes into the picture. If you'll be working anything here, like you're building any chat application or something, you want somebody to connect only with the person who are logged in or to the user who has accepted. This is how you inject the middleware. This is the most important thing. So in case you are looking forward to study more about the socket.io, go ahead and study a little bit on to this. So just like we have studied in our other courses as well, the next is given to you and you can pass on and inject the next, and next moves on to your second next statement, second middleware. Okay, I know this is quite a lot to take up, but I'll throw up all of this code on my GitHub repo as well, so that you can study more about it, you can add more features to it, or maybe do more fun stuff with that. And in case I get enough of the comments or requests, I'll try to make another similar crash course, but that time we'll be injecting an adapter of MongoDB so that we can store all of this chat into the database as well. So I hope you have enjoyed this one. If you have enjoyed this one, please let me know on my Instagram that you are studying from this crash course and you're enjoying this one. Let's go ahead and catch up in the next video.